Die Zusage für die Panzerlieferung an die Ukraine dauerte monatelang. Warum wurde jetzt nun doch von den USA, Deutschland und anderen NATO-Ländern entschieden, Abrams und Leoparden 2 zu liefern? War das Datum Zufall oder steckt Taktik dahinter, wenn es um eine mögliche Frühjahrsoffensive der ukrainischen Armee geht?
Why have the United States, Germany and other NATO countries now decided to supply Abrams and Leopard 2? Was the date a coincidence, or is the tactics behind a possible spring offensive by the Ukrainian army?
I think what we're seeing here is a reflection of the fact that NATO has a theoretical policy, but has never had an adequate practical response. The theoretical policy is to use Ukraine as a proxy military to weaken Russia for the goal of getting the Russian population to rise up and remove Vladimir Putin from power. That was the same policy behind their sanctions. You know, the sanctions that were supposed to break the Russian economy, but it ended up breaking the European economy. It's the same kind of wisdom that's going on here. Back in, I think, December of last year, General Zaluzhny, the chief of staff of the Ukrainian, or the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, gave an interview to The Economist magazine. And he said straight up, if you give me 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, and 500 artillery pieces, I can launch an offensive that will take the city of Melitopol, severing the land bridge between Russia and Crimea, and then use that position to recapture Crimea and push the Russians out of the Donbass. But he also said, if you don't give me this, then the Russians are going to win. And that's just a straight up honest statement. Now, he's wrong. He can have 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, and 500 artillery pieces, and he's not going to take Melitopol. But at least he put that premise out there. Now, let's reflect on what he was saying. See, Russia held referendums, and whether you agree with the referendums or not, it doesn't matter. Russia held them. And then, according to those referendums, the 4 territories of Ukraine, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, voted to become part of Russia. This is part of the notion of self-determination that's enshrined in the United Nations Charter. And Russia absorbed them. And under Article 65 of the Russian Constitution, they are part of Russia. So what the Ukrainian general is saying is that he wants NATO to empower him to execute a military operation that constitutes an existential threat to Russia. Now, people say, wait a minute, it's not driving on Moscow. It's not driving on St. Petersburg. I don't know if the Russians built up a Mexican army down south and was empowering them to go in and seize California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. It's not New York. It's not Washington State. It's not Virginia. It's not Florida. So how could it be it's an existential threat to the United States? And we would treat it as such. You bringing together the totality of our power to prevent this from happening. So Zaluzhny's asking NATO to empower him to engage in an existential threat against Russia. Why is this important? Russia has said straight up, there's only 2 reasons why it would use nuclear weapons. One would be as if it were attacked. And the second would be if NATO or a group of nations like NATO assembled sufficient conventional military power that represented an existential threat to the survival of Russia. So Zaluzhny is saying, give me the power to represent a threat to Russia so that what? I can trigger a nuclear war? Because that's what would happen. I don't think people quite understand that if NATO allowed Zaluzhny to threaten Crimea, that Russia would use nuclear weapons to stop that, not in Ukraine, but against NATO. Every German living in Berlin understands that if this happened, you'd be gone. I mean, it is literally Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. The same thing with the French, the British, Paris, London, Rome, Brussels, all of NATO that is behind this would disappear. Absolutely. And the West knows this. That's why at the Ramstein contact group that met on January 20th, instead of getting 500 infantry fighting vehicles, the Ukrainians were given 290. And they're not of the same kind. There's stuff that the Ukrainians can't even use. I mean, of course they can use it. Let's talk about them. The United States is providing 59 M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. These aren't the newest model. These are older ones that'll be refurbished and then provided to them. They are a maintenance nightmare. If you look at them, they break. And so we're giving them to the Ukrainians in hopes of what? That they can take 59, which is a battalion's worth, and with this battalion of M2 Bradleys, liberate Crimea? No. I mean, even if the Russians stepped aside and said, please enter Crimea, the majority of those vehicles would break down on their own volition before they got to Crimea. They're that difficult to maintain. But the Russians have built defensive systems, and they would slaughter these Ukrainians. So anybody in the M2 Bradley is literally a dead man driving. We're giving them 90 Stryker, infantry. They're not fighting vehicles; they're carrying vehicles. They can carry infantrymen, but the Ukrainians are going to use them as infantry fighting vehicles. Again, difficult to maintain, and one of the most difficult parts of it is what's called the height management system. It keeps the body of the vehicle off of the wheels, and it's very, very tricky. And if you don't constantly maintain it, it sinks down and flattens all the tires. And if you've ever tried to drive a Stryker with 8 flattened tires or 6 flattened, you can't. So basically, we've given them 90 death traps because the Americans who made this thing and who train their people still make mistakes. We still don't get the HMS right, and every once in a while, pop, tires go. Now we're going to turn it over to the Ukrainians who aren't properly trained, have no clue what they're doing, and will forget the multitude of steps that have to be taken to keep the HMS system functional. And then they're going to go to combat where enemy fire is going to literally numb their brain. So anything they thought they knew about maintaining the HMS is going to go straight out as they try to survive. Pop, the tires go, damn, Stryker's dead. Anybody inside is dead. And the wonderful German people, yay, Germany, you guys are awesome. You're giving them, 40 Marder vehicles? I mean, these are death traps, and you know it. That's why you're trying to replace them. You know the Marder's no good. But you're not going to give them the frontline Martyrs that you guys had because you really don't like the Ukrainians very much. You're going to give them the old Martyrs, and they're going to come in, and they're also a maintenance nightmare. And again, they're going to come in, break down. The Ukrainians aren't going to know how to use them. Wham! What did I just describe? 3 different vehicles, each of one with unique maintenance requirements, and you're going to turn it over to a Ukrainian army that's never dealt with any of these vehicles. They have no ability to maintain them or logistically sustain them. You are literally inviting the Ukrainians to commit suicide, and that's just with the infantry fighting vehicles. They asked for 500 artillery pieces. We're giving them 124 about. And again, these are different kinds of artillery pieces, different maintenance requirements, different support requirements, et cetera. And they're not designed. NATO never envisioned going to war where they have to fire at a sustained rate like the Ukrainians have to do on the front line. So all these wonderful Western artillery pieces are going to go to the front line. They're going to enter a high rate of fire, and they're going to break. And again, the Ukrainians don't know how to fix them. So now they're either going to get destroyed in place, or they have to be taken out back to Poland, Germany, or wherever they came from to be maintained. Wow, we've done them a great favor. And now we're giving them tanks. Why? Because we want to feel good. Because Zelensky said, without tanks, I can't win. And we're telling them we want you to launch an attack, but we don't want them to win. We just want them to kill Russians. That's it. That's all we want to happen here. We want Russia to become weaker, so weak that the people rise up against Vladimir Putin. It's not working. One, this has just made Russia stronger. I hope all the wonderful German people understand the stupidity of your government's policies. You see, prior to this, the Russian army apparently wasn't as good as everybody thought it was. They weren't bad, but they were a peacetime army. And the problem with peacetime armies, especially a peacetime army that has been exercised in 30 years, is that a lot of rust builds up on the system, especially in terms of mobilization. You allowed Russia to mobilize. It was a partial mobilization, 300,000. But in doing so, Russia went, wow, we have made a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of errors here. We have to fix this. And they fixed it. So now if they have to mobilize again, they know how to do it. You know what to accomplish. Thank you, Germany. You guys are geniuses. And the Russian peacetime component that existed prior to this was under 1 million men, which was barely enough to defend Russia, let alone launch. It couldn't even sustain an extended campaign in Ukraine. They didn't have enough men. So what has Russia done? Well, because Germany has supported the expansion of NATO into Sweden and Finland, Russia said, well, we're just going to go ahead and expand our military to 1.5 million. And we're going to build a new army group opposite of Finland, and we're going to build new airborne divisions, new marine divisions, new artillery divisions. We're going to convert some units that were brigades into divisions. We're basically, Russia's making an army that, if it wanted to, could put T-90 tanks into downtown Berlin in a week. Thank you, Germany. You guys are geniuses. You're really the smartest people on. But no, Germany, you're going to be able to stop them, right? Because, gosh, you are, after all, Germany. I mean, you are heirs. You're the progeny of the same, jackbooted thugs, murderous Nazis that marched to the east, raped Poland, raped Russia, raped everything they touched because Nazis suck. You guys, that's what you like to do, right? That's what you want to do. That's what Germany wants to do. You want to attack Russians. You want to hurt Russians, except, gosh, I don't know. It was your senior civilian in the military. I don't know. I can't remember his name, but he got on. He said, we're naked. We got nothing. We got nothing. If we wanted to go to war today, we can't. And now what little we have, we're going to give away to the Ukrainians. And if you think you're going to build new tanks, understand that because of our current economic state, we can't afford to build new tanks. We don't have the money to build new tanks. Wow, Germany, you guys are the smartest people on the planet, but you're not. And I'll tell you how I know you're not. Because you think by giving tanks to Ukraine, you're helping Ukraine. You're not. Let's count them. How many tanks is Germany committed to giving right now? 14. The same number that the British gave, 14 Challenger 2 tanks. Gosh, guys, and when are you going to give it to them? Sometime in March, April, end of March, early April is the soonest you can give it to them. It takes 22 weeks to train a tanker. 22 weeks. I don't know. I'm just a simple Marine. But if I go from where we are today in January, and I count the weeks that remain, I think I get up to maybe 10. That's not even half the time that's necessary to train a crew member. And you're going to turn tanks over to Ukraine with insufficiently trained crews, and you're going to turn 14 of them. That's overwhelming power, guys. 14 tanks. This is all after all the German Leopard 2. You put 14 tanks online with insufficient crew, but that's okay. It will just be able to drive through the Russian army like a hot knife through butter. You're going to lose every single one of those tanks, and every man inside is going to die. Yay, Germany, you're awesome. But you did it because you don't want to step late. You did it so that others would. And so others are following suit with the same level of enthusiasm. Poland, who's been dying apparently to send these tanks in, is going to give 14. Norway, 8. Finland, 12. We can just go on and on. It's just awesome what they're doing. And nations that are stepping up and say, we're going to give more than that, they're not giving the Leopard 2 A6. They're giving the Leopard 2 A4 or the Leopard 1. Death traps, literal death traps. And Germany, while you may have, only recently awakened to the reality of who you are, because you are nothing but an extension of Nazi Germany. Literally, you are. You suck. You're the most horrible people in the world, etc. But you're not very good at it, because the Russians have known this is the reality about you. They learned that lesson once, and they're never going to forget that lesson. If you don't think the Russian military has been training and equipping and preparing for this day, you know nothing. If you think the Leopard 2 is going to show up on the battlefield and the Russians go, oh my God, a big German tank, we're going to run away. No, they are chomping at the bit to be able to do what their grandparents did, destroy German steel on Ukrainian soil and kill the men inside. Thank you, Germany. You've made a lot of Russian soldiers very, very happy.
Der ukrainische Präsident Wladimir Zelensky hat in einem Interview behauptet, dass bei ihm kein Interesse bestehe, Verhandlungen mit Russland aufzunehmen. Was ist denn dann sein Ziel Ihrer Meinung nach?
In an interview, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said he was not interested in negotiations with Russia. What do you think is his aim?
Well, Zelensky is clearly appeasing his Western masters. He's receiving this equipment to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to kill Russians. Anybody who thinks that Ukraine is going to win this war has no clue what's going on inside Ukraine right now, none whatsoever. But by providing Ukraine with these weapons, remember that in order for Russia to kill Ukrainians, they give Ukrainians an opportunity to kill Russians. And even if the kill ratio is 10-1, let's say Russia kills 40,000 Ukrainians. That means Ukraine is going to kill at least 4,000 Russians. And this is all NATO is in. NATO doesn't care about the Ukrainian death figures. They don't care. Not a single. How many Germans are weeping over the graveyards that exist in Ukraine right now? You wonderful German people, you great humanitarians. Have you visited these graveyards? Have you looked into the eyes of the mothers and the daughters and the grandmothers and the sons and the uncles who are burying their loved ones who are dying because Angela Merkel promoted this war? No, you aren't, because you're hypocrites, you're cowards, you're slugs. You sit at home and you put the Ukrainian flag on your shirt and on your social media, and you say, oh my God, we're such good people, wonderful people. You're Nazis. That's all you are, Nazis. The Nazis didn't care about the graveyards. You don't care about the graveyard. You know who does care about the graveyards? Russia. When was the last time a German medical team went into Ukraine to help retrieve the bodies on the battlefield and turn them over to the loved ones so there can be at least closure, some sort of honorable burying of the remains? Never. The Ukrainians don't do it. They just abandon the bodies in the battleground. It's the Russians that clean up the battlefield. The Russians that treat dead with dignity, box them up, and then arrange for them to be transferred over to the Ukrainians so they can be turned over to their families. The Russians care. The Russians are literal humanitarians, not you Germans. And so here's Zelensky saying, I don't want a ceasefire. I can't negotiate. Newsflash, Zelensky, Russia's not going to negotiate with you. Haven't you heard? You're a Nazi. And it's just not a label that Russia's put on you. You're a Nazi. You literally are a Nazi. You endorse Stepan Bandera. You tolerate Stepan Bandera's odious ideology. You have converted your nation into the living embodiment of Banderism. So Russia has said, you are going to go. You are going to be relegated to history. Now, how you choose to enter the history books, the final pages of your little chapter, is up to you. You could do the honorable thing, which is to put a bullet in your own brain, or you can continue to be the bad leader you are. Maybe one of your Ukrainian generals will do it for you, or you can take the coward's way out. Flee the nation, fall in on the hundreds of millions of dollars that you have embezzled from the Ukrainian people, and live the life of luxury, forever disgraced in your homeland. But you'll be treated well in the nations that have propped you up. Russia's not going to negotiate with Zelensky. There will be no negotiation here. Ask General Krebs and General Wiedling. And these are names that maybe the Germans might want to familiarize themselves with. Those are the two generals that surrendered Berlin to General Chuikov. Now, Chuikov is a name that most Germans might, again, want to familiarize yourself. He was the commander of the 62nd Army in Stalingrad, where the Russians broke the back of Nazi Germany's assault on the Soviet Union. And his army was so heroic that they renamed it the 8th Guards Army. And he's the guy that actually led the charge into Berlin. The Tiergarten, where the current memorial is, was captured by Chuikov's forces. And Chuikov received General Krebs and General Wiedling, not because it was a negotiation. It was basically unconditional surrender. You don't get to tell us what you think you want to have happen. You're just going to surrender and pray we show mercy. And the Russians did show mercy. Maybe they shouldn't have, because somewhere right now in Germany are the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of Krebs and Wiedling and the other Germans that the Soviets allowed to survive. And they're sitting there doing the same thing, promoting war against Russia. Read your history, Germany. It doesn't end well for you.
Nach Waffen und Panzern stehen nun auf dem Wunschzettel Kiews auch Kampfjets. Wo soll das Ihrer Meinung nach denn enden?
Kiev's wish list now includes fighter jets. Where do you think this is going to end?
I mean, at some point in time, this becomes a comedy show if the results weren't so tragic. I think what he's talking about is he wants F-16 fighters, American-made F-16 fighters. Why? Because like the Leopard 2 tank and the M1 tank, they exist everywhere. They're all throughout NATO. So NATO nations would gladly give up their F-16s. Maybe the United States would. The F-16's a very old airframe. And unless you get one of the newer models, you're going to inherit an airframe that literally the wings are being flown off of it. It's been flown so much. Zelensky might want to study what's called metal fatigue and what happens when you overstress metal at time. It will break. So, the American Air Force has literally been flying the wings off of its F-16s. And so many of these aircraft aren't as mission capable as they were intended to be. They require a lot of maintenance, et cetera. But it's a decent aircraft if you put an American pilot who has been extensively trained in its operations in the cockpit. And then that American pilot has to be directed and coordinated in the battlefield with an AWACS airplane, airborne warning and control aircraft, with E3, we call it Sentry. And it will direct the pilot using intelligence information, et cetera. And then the pilot will be flying with other pilots who will provide coverage and support. There will be electronic warfare that will fly and support. So it's a team effort. The F-16 by itself isn't going to do anything. So except kill the Ukrainian pilot that's going to be flying it. It takes a long time to train an F-16 pilot. There are a lot of pilots transition into the F-16 from other aircraft. It's not an overnight transition. It's a lengthy process of relearning how to fly that particular airframe. So Zelensky went, please, America, give Zelensky every F-16 he wants. Europe, empty out your arsenal. Give Zelensky every F-16 you have. Give it to him. Give him everything. Please do it. Do it. Because that's the quickest way to kill all of Ukraine's pilots. That's it. All it will do is result in dead Ukrainian pilots. Ukraine has a air defense system that is hanging on by the skin of its teeth, but it's still sufficient to threaten Russian aircraft over, but if you put Ukrainian aircraft up over Ukrainian airspace, they will be shot down by Russian air defense, which is far more superior than anything either Ukraine or NATO has. And just ask NATO. I mean, Germany, you know this, you guys. You sat in on the meeting when the Shahed 136s, which the Russians call Geranium 2s, started raining down on Ukraine, and the Ukrainian air defense couldn't stop them. It was Germany together with the rest of Europe that met in an emergency session saying, we don't have anything that can stop this. We need to spend billions of dollars to try and build an air defense system. So you guys are naked, not only on the ground, according to the German official, but you're naked in air defense as well. Ukraine is as well. Give them all your aircraft. Please give them every single thing they're asking for so that they can all be destroyed, and Europe will even be weaker when Russia decides to drive in on Berlin and park its T-90 tanks on the Tiergarten pedestals.